I'm talking about really creating a diversity of men and women and age, skill sets, ethnicity, and importantly, diversity of thought. And I have a real passion for it. I always have. I think the other thing that's really key with diversity, Bushy, is inclusion. It just can't be diversity. And you'll hear a lot of Aboriginal people say, you know, you've got these big RAP plans where you want at least 2 or 3% of your workforce to be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, but you don't include us. So you recruit us, but you don't include us because we all got different needs. Women have different needs to men and so on. It's all about inclusion. So if we talk about diversity, we need the inclusion piece. Otherwise we're just going to keep on talking about diversity. There's always going to be the people who are biased, that they don't want women or young people or people with different skill sets on their board. I get it. So let's change them. Let's focus on the people who have an unconscious bias and try and help them see that what those biases are doing to stop having true diversity and inclusion on their boards and in their management and exec teams.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share great conversations with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how and where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits that this has created. You see, the truth is that everyone invests. Every minute of every day, we're investing our time, our skills, our energy and our money in something. Some of us are investing consciously, some unconsciously, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, sometimes for no impact. Get Invested will help you to start living by design, not by default. I'm going to help you to make it happen, not let it happen. You will hear the top tips on how you can live with conscious intent so that you can live more, work less, and leave a living legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living your dream, not someone else's. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at bushymartin.com.au/get invested. Thanks for listening, and now let's get invested. Hi, freedom fighters. Let's kick off today's episode by getting you to use your imagination in an exercise that I've borrowed from Valerie Alexander. I'm going to ask you to visualise a scenario, so please close your eyes unless you're driving or moving. Take a deep breath and imagine that you're late to catch a plane flight. You rush through the airport, you make it through security, you dash to the gate, you run down the boarding bridge and you step on the plane just as they close the door behind you. And the pilot steps out of the cockpit and he says, "Hi." A few hours later, you arrive safely at your destination and you go to a local restaurant and you have the best meal of your life. And really enjoy this because there's no calories in a visualisation. And at the table next to you is a married couple happily celebrating their anniversary. The next morning you go to a big conference and the CEO of a successful high-profile company is a keynote speaker. Do you have a clear mental picture of all of this? Okay, now let me ask you some questions about what you visualised. Was the pilot black? Was the couple celebrating their anniversary two men? Was the CEO giving the keynote presentation a woman? Now, it's okay if one or all of your answers was no, because your brain instantly creates images of what's familiar. And your brain is much less of a fan of what's not familiar. And the things I just mentioned are generally less familiar. The black pilot, the same-sex married couple, and the female CEO. So no matter how much you might love the idea of those things, when immediately confronted with them, your brain's amygdala, which is the most ancient part of your brain, signals the hypothalamus to fire up the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is where your brain and the endocrine system intersect. So at this point, your adrenal glands release cortisol into your bloodstream, which triggers your stress response. This is the physiology of stress. And according to the Dartmouth Undergraduate Journal of Science, all of this happens in a millisecond, long before you've got the chance to consciously think, I'm so happy that these two men have the freedom to marry who they love. As Dr. Susan Fiske explains, when it comes to unfamiliar social situations, there's ample evidence that encouraging something fundamentally different from what we expect elicits a stronger activation in the amygdala than encountering something or someone that we perceive as the norm. This is what has allowed our Homo sapiens species to survive for millions of years. This instantaneous instinctive response that triggers either fight or flight, which is what kept us from being eaten by saber-toothed tigers or killed by a member of a foreign tribe. But in modern society, our brains still do this when we encounter the unexpected. Our hearts race slightly, our blood pressure goes up, we sweat a little, and for no discernible reason, we just feel stressed out. Our brain is exposed to over 11 million pieces of information a second, but we're only capable of dealing with about 40. So our brain filters and simplifies masses of data and looks for patterns that triggers automatic emotional and physical intuitive responses that allows us to make quick decisions that saves us in threatening situations and prevents us from going into data overload meltdown and freezing on the spot. The flip side of this is that our evolution has created inbuilt unconscious and subconscious bias during the millennia of our hunter and gatherer past that helped us survive and grow as a species. But the same inbuilt automatic bias now hamstrings and restricts our approach to equality, diversity and inclusion in the modern world where these inbuilt survival protections are no longer relevant. And this evolutionary mental bias has been further exacerbated by the mental, social and political constructs that Homo sapiens have developed to control and coordinate the growth of our communities, our cities and our civilizations. This growing bias, prejudice and separation is best described and captured by the thought-leading work of the historian Yuval Noah Harari in his groundbreaking book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, which I'm now going to draw on and quote from to gain a better understanding and historical context of how we've ended up with such widespread and ingrained inequality across the globe. Understanding human history in the millennia following the agricultural revolution boils down to a single question. How did humans organise themselves in mass cooperation networks when they lacked the biological instincts necessary to sustain such networks? The short answer is that humans created imagined orders and devised scripts. These two inventions filled the gaps left by our biological inheritance. However, the appearance of these networks was, for many, a dubious blessing. The imagined orders sustaining these networks were neither neutral nor fair. They divided people into make-believe groups arranged in a hierarchy. The upper levels enjoyed privileges and power, while the lower ones suffered from discrimination and oppression. Hammurabi's code, for example, developed by the Mesopotamian kings for the Babylonian Empire from 1792 to 1750 BC, established a pecking order of superiors, commoners and slaves. Superiors got all the good things in life, commoners got what was left, and slaves got a beating if they complained. And despite its proclamation of the equality of all men, the imagined order established by the Americans in 1776 also established a hierarchy. It created a hierarchy between men, who benefited from it, and women, whom it left disempowered. It created a hierarchy between whites, who enjoyed liberty, and blacks and American Indians, who were considered humans of a lesser type and therefore didn't share in the equal rights of men. Many of those who signed the Declaration of Independence were slaveholders. They didn't release their slaves upon signing the Declaration, nor do they consider themselves hypocrites. In their view, the rights of men had little to do with Negroes. The American order also consecrated the hierarchy between rich and poor. Most Americans at the time had little problem with the inequality caused by wealthy parents passing their money and their businesses onto their children. In their view, equality meant simply that the same laws applied to rich and poor. It had nothing to do with unemployment benefits, integrated education, or health insurance. Liberty, too, carried very different connotations than it does today. In 1776, it didn't mean that the disempowered, certainly not blacks or Indians or, God forbid, women, could gain and exercise power. It meant simply that the state could not, except in unusual circumstances, confiscate a citizen's private property or tell him what to do with it. The American order thereby upheld the hierarchy of wealth, which some thought was mandated by God, and others viewed as representing the immutable laws of nature. Nature, it was claimed, rewarded merit with wealth while penalising indolence. But all these distinctions between free persons and slaves, between whites and blacks, between rich and poor, are rooted in fictions. Yet it's an iron rule of history that every imagined hierarchy disavows its fictional origins and claims to be both natural and inevitable. For instance, many people who have viewed the hierarchy of free persons and slaves as natural and correct have argued that slavery is not a human invention. Hammurabi saw it as ordained by the gods. The Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that slaves have a slavish nature, whereas free people have a free nature. Their status in society is merely a reflection of their innate nature. Hindus who adhere to the caste system believe that cosmic forces have made one caste superior to another. According to a famous Hindu creation myth, the gods fashioned the world out of the body of a primeval being, the Purusa. Now, I'm not very good at the pronunciation of some of these things, so bear with me here. And I apologise to anyone I'm going to offend with my very bad pronunciation. So the sun was created from the Purusa's eye, the moon from the Purusa's brain, the Brahmins or priests from its mouth, the Kshatriyas or warriors from its arms, the Vaishyas, who were peasants and merchants, from its thighs, and the Shudras or servants from its legs. Accept this explanation, and the socio-political differences between Brahmins and Shudras are as natural and as eternal as the differences between the sun and the moon. The ancient Chinese believed that when the goddess Nuwa created humans from earth, she needed aristocrats from fine yellow soil, whereas commoners were formed from brown mud. Yet, to the best of our understanding, these hierarchies are all the product of human imagination. Brahmins and Shudras were not really treated by the gods from different body parts of a primeval being. Instead, the distinction between the two castes was created by laws and norms invented by humans in northern India about 3,000 years ago. Contrary to Aristotle, there's no known biological difference between slaves and free people. Human laws and norms have turned some people into slaves and others into masters. Between blacks and whites, there are some objective biological differences, such as skin colour and hair type, but there's no evidence that the differences extend to intelligence or morality. Most people claim that their social hierarchy is natural and just, while those of other societies are based on false and ridiculous criteria. Modern Westerners are taught to scoff at the idea of racial hierarchy. They're shocked by laws prohibiting blacks to live in white neighbourhoods, or to study in white schools, or to be treated in white hospitals. But the hierarchy of rich and poor, which mandates that rich people live in separate and more luxurious neighbourhoods, study in separate and more prestigious schools, and receive medical treatment in separate and better equipped facilities, seems perfectly sensible to many in the Western world. Yet it's a proven fact that most rich people are rich for the simple reason that they were born into a rich family, while most poor people will remain poor throughout their lives simply because they were born into a poor family. Unfortunately, complex human societies seem to require imagined hierarchies and unjust discrimination. Of course, not all hierarchies are morally identical, and some societies suffered from more extreme types of discrimination than others. Yet scholars know of no large society that has been able to dispense with discrimination altogether. Time and again, people have created order in their societies by classifying the population into imagined categories, such as superiors, commoners and slaves, whites and blacks, patricians and plebeians, Brahmins and Shudras, or rich and poor. These categories have regulated relations between millions of humans by making some people legally, politically, or socially superior to others. Hierarchies serve an important function. They enable complete strangers to know how to treat one another without wasting the time and energy needed to become personally acquainted. For example, in George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, Henry Higgins doesn't need to establish an intimate acquaintance with Eliza Doolittle in order to understand how he should relate to her. Just hearing her talk tells him that she's a member of the underclass with whom he can do as he wishes. For example, using her as a pawn in a bet to pass her off from a flower girl to a duchess. A modern Eliza working at a florist's needs to know how much effort to put into selling roses and gladioli to the dozens of people who enter the shop each day. She can't make a detailed inquiry into the tastes and wallets of each individual. Instead, she uses social cues, such as the way a person is dressed, his or her age, and, if she's not politically correct, his skin colour. That's how she immediately distinguishes between the accounting firm partner who's likely to place a large order for expensive roses versus a messenger boy who can only afford a bunch of daisies. Of course, differences in natural abilities also play a role in the formation of social distinctions. But such diversities of aptitudes and character are usually mediated through imagined hierarchies. This happens in two really important ways. First and foremost, most abilities have to be nurtured and developed. Even if somebody is born with a particular talent, that talent will usually remain latent if it's not fostered, honed and exercised. Not all people get the same chance to cultivate and refine their abilities. Whether or not they have such an opportunity will usually depend on their place within their society's imagined hierarchy. Second, even if people belonging to different classes develop exactly the same abilities, they're unlikely to enjoy equal success because they'll have to play the game by different rules. If, in British-ruled India, an untouchable, a Brahmin, a Catholic Irishman, and a Protestant Englishman had somehow developed exactly the same business acumen, they still wouldn't have had the same chance of becoming rich. The economic game was rigged by legal restrictions and unofficial glass ceilings. So, all societies are based on imagined hierarchies, but not necessarily on the same hierarchies. What accounts for the differences? Why did traditional Indian society classify people according to caste, Ottoman society according to religion, and American society according to race? In most cases, the hierarchy originated as a result of a set of accidental historical circumstances and was then perpetuated and refined over many generations as different groups developed vested interests in it. For instance, many scholars surmise that the Hindu caste system took shape when Indo-Aryan people invaded the Indian subcontinent about 3,000 years ago, subjugating the local population. The invaders established a stratified society in which they, of course, occupied the leading positions as priests and warriors, leaving the natives to live as servants and slaves. The invaders, who were few in number, feared losing their privileged status and unique identity. To forestall this danger, they divided the population into castes, each of which was required to pursue a specific occupation or perform a specific role in society. Each had different legal status, privileges and duties. Mixing of castes, social interaction, marriage, even the sharing of meals was prohibited. And the distinctions were not just legal, they became an inherent part of religious mythology and practice. The rulers argued that the caste system reflected an eternal cosmic reality rather than a chance historical development. Concepts of purity and impurity were essential elements in Hindu religion, and they were harnessed to buttress the social pyramid. Pious Hindus were taught that contact with members of a different caste could pollute not only them personally, but society as a whole, and should therefore be abhorred. Such ideas are hardly unique to Hindus. Throughout history, and in almost all societies, concepts of pollution and purity have played a leading role in enforcing social and political divisions, and have been exploited by numerous ruling classes to maintain their privileges. The fear of pollution is not a complete fabrication of priests and princes, however. It probably has its roots in biological survival mechanisms that makes humans feel an instinctive revulsion towards potential disease carriers, such as sick persons and dead bodies. If you want to keep any human group isolated, women, Jews, gays, blacks, the best way to do it is to convince everyone that these people are a source of pollution. In this way, the Hindu caste system and its attendant laws of purity became deeply embedded in Indian culture. Long after the Indo-Aryan invasion was forgotten, Indians continued to believe in the caste system and to abhor the pollution caused by caste mixing. Castes were not immune to change. In fact, as time went by, large castes were divided into subcastes. Eventually, the original 4 castes turned into 3,000 different groupings called yati, literally meaning birth. But this proliferation of castes didn't change the basic principle of the system, according to which every person is born into a particular rank, and any infringement of its rules pollutes the person and the society as a whole. A person's yati determines her profession, the food she can eat, her place of residence, and her eligible marriage partners. Usually, a person can marry only within his or her caste, and the resulting children inherit that same status. Whenever a new profession developed or a new group of people appeared on the scene, they had to be recognised as a caste in order to receive a legitimate place within Hindu society. Groups that failed to win recognition as a caste were literally outcasts. In this stratified society, they didn't even occupy the lowest rung. They became known as untouchables. They had to live apart from all other people and scrape together a living in humiliating and disgusting ways, such as sifting through garbage dumps for scrap material. Even members of the lowest caste avoided mingling with them, eating with them, touching them, and certainly marrying them. In modern India, matters of marriage and work are still heavily influenced by the caste system, despite all attempts by the demographic government of India to break down such distinctions and convince Hindus that there's nothing polluting in caste mixing. A similar vicious circle perpetuated the racial hierarchy in modern America. From the 16th to the 18th century, the European conquerors imported millions of African slaves to work the mines and plantations of America. Due to circumstantial factors, the burgeoning new societies of America were to be divided into a ruling caste of white Europeans and a subjugated caste of black Africans. But people don't like to say that they keep slaves of a certain race or origin simply because it's economically expedient. Like the Aryan conquerors of India, white Europeans in the Americas wanted to be seen not only as economically successful, but also as pious, just, and objective. Religious and scientific myths were pressed into service to justify this division. Theologians argued that Africans descend from Ham, the son of Noah, saddled by his father with a curse that his offspring would have to be slaves. Biologists argued that blacks are less intelligent than whites and their moral sense is less developed. Doctors alleged that blacks live in filth and spread diseases. In other words, they're a source of pollution. These myths struck a chord in American culture and in Western culture generally. They continued to exert their influence long after the conditions that created slavery had disappeared. In the early 19th century, Imperial Britain outlawed slavery and stopped the Atlantic slave trade. And in the decades that followed, slavery was gradually outlawed throughout the American continent. Notably, this was the first and only time in history that slave-holding societies voluntarily abolished slavery. But even though the slaves were freed, the racist myths that justified slavery persisted. Separation of the races was maintained by racist legislation and social custom. The result was a self-reinforcing cycle of cause and effect, a vicious circle. Consider, for example, the southern United States immediately after the Civil War. In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the US Constitution outlawed slavery, and the 14th Amendment mandated that citizenship and the equal protection of the law could not be denied on the basis of race. However, 2 centuries of slavery meant that most black families were far poorer and far less educated than most white families. A black person born in Alabama in 1865 thus had much less chance of getting a good education and a well-paid job than did his white neighbours. His children, born in the 1880s and the 1890s, started life with the same disadvantage. They too were born to an uneducated, poor family. But economic disadvantage was not the whole story. Alabama was also home to many poor whites who lacked the opportunities available to their better-off racial brothers and sisters. In addition, the Industrial Revolution and the waves of immigration made the United States an extremely fluid society, where rags could quickly turn into riches. But if money was all that mattered, the sharp divide between the races should soon have blurred, not least through intermarriage. But that didn't happen. By 1865, whites, as well as many blacks, took it to be a simple matter of fact that blacks were less intelligent, more violent and sexually dissolute, lazier and less concerned about personal cleanliness than whites. They were thus the agents of violence, theft, rape and disease. In other words, pollution. If a black Alabama man in 1895 miraculously managed to get a good education and then applied for a respectable job such as a bank teller, his odds of being accepted were far worse than those of an equally qualified white candidate. The stigma that labelled blacks as, by nature, unreliable, lazy and less intelligent conspired against him. You might think that people would gradually understand that these stigmas were myth rather than fact, and that blacks would be able, over time, to prove themselves just as competent, law-abiding and clean as whites. In fact, the opposite happened. These prejudices became more and more entrenched as time went by. Since all the best jobs were held by whites, it became easier to believe that blacks really were inferior. Look, said the average white citizen, blacks have been free for generations, yet there are almost no black professors, lawyers, doctors or even bank tellers. Isn't that proof that blacks are simply less intelligent and hard-working? Trapped in this vicious cycle, blacks were not hired for white-collar jobs because they were deemed unintelligent, and the proof of their inferiority was the paucity of blacks in white-collar jobs. And the vicious cycle didn't stop there. As anti-black stigmas grew stronger, they were translated into a system of Jim Crow laws and norms that were meant to safeguard the racial order. Blacks were forbidden to vote in elections, to study in white schools, to buy in white stores, to eat in white restaurants, to sleep in white hotels. The justification for all of this was that blacks were foul, slothful and vicious, so whites had to be protected from them. Whites didn't want to sleep in the same hotel as blacks or eat in the same restaurant for fear of diseases. They didn't want their children learning in the same school as black children for fear of brutality and bad influences. They didn't want blacks voting in elections since blacks were ignorant and immoral. These fears were substantiated by scientific studies that proved, in quotations, that blacks were indeed less educated, that various diseases were far more common among them, and that their crime rate was higher. Of course, the studies conveniently ignored the fact that these so-called facts resulted from discrimination against blacks. By the mid-20th century, segregation in the former Confederate states was probably worse than in the late 19th century. Clennon King, for example, a black student who applied to the University of Mississippi in 1958, was forcefully committed to a mental asylum. The presiding judge ruled that a black person must surely be insane to think that he could be admitted to the University of Mississippi. Go figure. Now, with time, the racism spread to more and more cultural arenas. American aesthetic culture was built around white standards of beauty. The physical attributes of the white race, for example, light skin, fair and straight hair, and a small upturned nose, came to be identified as beautiful. Typical black features, dark skin, dark and bushy hair, a flattened nose, were deemed as ugly. These preconceptions ingrained the imagined hierarchy at an even deeper level of human consciousness. Such vicious cycles can go on for centuries and even millennia, perpetuating an imagined hierarchy that sprang from a chance historical occurrence. Unjust discrimination often gets worse, not better, with time. Money comes to money, and poverty to poverty. Education comes to education, and ignorance to ignorance. Those once victimised by history are likely to be victimised yet again. And those whom victory has privileged are more likely to be privileged again. Most socio-political hierarchies lack a logical or biological basis. They're nothing but the perpetuation of chance events supported by myths. Different societies adopt different kinds of imagined hierarchies. Race is very important to modern Americans, but was relatively insignificant to medieval Muslims. Caste was a matter of life and death in medieval India, whereas in modern Europe, it's practically non-existent. One hierarchy, however, has been of supreme importance in all known human societies, the hierarchy of gender. People everywhere have divided themselves into men and women, and almost everywhere men have got the better deal, at least since the agricultural revolution. Some of the earliest Chinese texts are oracle bones dating to 1200 BC, which were used to define the future. On one was engraved the question, "Will Lady Howe's childbearing be lucky?" To which was written reply, "If the child is born on a ding day, lucky. If on a geng day, vastly auspicious." However, Lady Howe was to give birth on a Jayan day. The text ends with a morose observation. 3 weeks and 1 day later, on Jayan day, the child was born. Not lucky. It was a girl. More than 3,000 years later, when Communist China enacted the one-child policy, many Chinese families continued to regard the birth of a girl as a misfortune. Parents would occasionally abandon or even murder newborn baby girls in order to have another shot at getting a boy. In many societies, women were simply the property of men, most often their fathers, husbands, or brothers. Rape, in many legal systems, falls under property violation. In other words, the victim is not the woman who was raped, but the male who owns her. This being the case, the legal remedy was the transfer of ownership. The rapist was required to pay a bride price to the woman's father or brother, upon which she became the rapist's property. The Bible Old Testament book of Deuteronomy decrees that if a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they're found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife. The ancient Hebrews considered this a reasonable arrangement. Raping a woman who did not belong to any man was not even considered a crime at all, just as picking up a lost coin on a busy street is not considered theft. And if a husband raped his own wife, he hadn't committed a crime. In fact, the idea that a husband could rape his wife was an oxymoron. To be a husband was to have full control of your wife's sexuality. To say that a husband raped his wife was as illogical as saying that a man stole his own wallet. Such thinking was not confined to the ancient Middle East. As of 2006, there were still 53 countries where a husband could not be prosecuted for the rape of his wife. Even in Germany, rape laws were amended only in 1997 to create a legal category of marital rape. So is the division into men and women a product of the imagination, like the caste system in India and the racial system in America? Or is it a natural division with deep biological roots? And if it is indeed a natural division, are there any biological explanations for the preference given to men over women? Some of the cultural, legal and political disparities between men and women reflect the obvious biological differences between the sexes. Childbearing has always been women's job because men don't have wombs. Yet around this hard universal kernel, every society accumulated layer upon layer of cultural ideas and norms that have little to do with biology. Societies associate a host of attributes with masculinity and femininity that, for the most part, lack a firm biological basis. For instance, in demographic Athens of the 5th century BC, an individual possessing a womb had no independent legal status and was forbidden to participate in popular assemblies or to be a judge. With few exceptions, such an individual could not benefit from a good education, nor engage in business or in philosophical discourse. None of Athens' political leaders, none of its great philosophers, orators, artists or merchants had a womb. Does having a womb make a person unfit biologically for these professions? The ancient Athenians thought so, but modern Athenians disagree. In present-day Athens, women vote, are elected to public office, make speeches, design everything from jewellery to buildings to software, and go to university. Their wombs don't keep them from doing any of these things as successfully as men do. True, they are still underrepresented in politics and business. Only about 12% of the members of Greece's parliament are women. But there's no legal barrier to their participation in politics, and most modern Greeks thinks it's quite normal for a woman to serve in public office. Many modern Greeks also think that an integral part of being a man is being sexually attracted to women only and having sexual relations exclusively with the opposite sex. They don't see this as a cultural bias, but rather as a biological reality. Relations between two people of the opposite sex are natural, and between two people of the same sex unnatural. In fact, Mother Nature doesn't mind if men are sexually attracted to one another. It's only human mothers steeped in particular cultures who make a scene if their son has a fling with the boy next door. The mother's tantrums are not a biological imperative. A significant number of human cultures have viewed homosexual relations as not only legitimate, but even socially constructive. Ancient Greece being the most notable example. The Iliad doesn't mention that Thetis had any objection to her son Achilles' relations with Patroclus. Queen Olympias of Macedon was one of the most temperamental and forceful women of the ancient world, and even had her own husband, King Philip, assassinated. Yet she didn't have a fit when her son, Alexander the Great, brought his lover, Hepathion, home for dinner. How can we distinguish what is biologically determined from what people merely try to justify through biological myths? A good rule of thumb is biology enables where culture forbids. Biology is willing to tolerate a very wide spectrum of possibilities. It's culture that obliges people to realise some possibilities while forbidding others. Biology enables women to have children. Some cultures oblige women to realise this possibility. Biology enables men to enjoy sex with one another. Some cultures forbid them to realise this possibility. Culture tends to argue that it forbids only that which is unnatural, but from a biological perspective, nothing is unnatural. Whatever is possible is, by definition, also natural. A truly unnatural behaviour, one that goes against the laws of nature, simply can't exist. So it would need no prohibition. No culture has ever bothered to forbid men to photosynthesize, women to run faster than the speed of light, or negatively charged electrons to be attracted to each other. In truth, our concepts natural and unnatural are taken not from biology, but from Christian theology. The theological meaning of natural is in accordance with the intentions of the God who created nature. Christian theologians argued that God created the human body, intending each limb and organ to serve a particular purpose. If we use our limbs and organs for the purpose envisioned by God, then it's a natural activity. To use them differently than God intends is unnatural. But evolution has no purpose. Organs haven't evolved with a purpose, and the way they are used is in constant flux. There's not a single organ in the human body that only does the job its prototype did when it first appeared hundreds of millions of years ago. Organs evolved to perform a particular function, but once they exist, they can be adapted for other usages as well. Mouths, for example, appeared because the earliest multicellular organisms needed a way to take nutrients into their bodies. We still use our mouths for that purpose, but we also use them to kiss, to speak, and, if we're Rambo, to pull the pins out of hand grenades. Now, are any of these uses unnatural simply because our worm-like ancestors 600 million years ago didn't do these things with their mouths? The same sort of multitasking applies to our sexual organs and behaviour. Sex first evolved for procreation and courtship rituals as a way of sizing up the fitness of a potential mate. But many animals now put both to use for a multitude of social purposes that have little to do with creating little copies of themselves. Chimpanzees, for example, use sex to cement political alliances, establish intimacy, and diffuse tensions. Is that unnatural? There is little sense, then, in arguing that the natural function of women is to give birth, or that homosexuality is unnatural. Most of the laws, norms, rights, and obligations that define manhood and womanhood reflect human imagination more than they do biological reality. Biologically, humans are divided into males and females. A male, Homo sapiens, is one who has one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. A female is one with two X's. But man and woman name social, not biological categories. While in the great majority of cases in most human societies, men are males and women are females, the social terms carry a lot of baggage that has only a tenuous, if any, relationship to the biological terms. A man is not a sapiens with particular biological qualities such as XY chromosomes, testicles, and lots of testosterone. Rather, he fits into a particular slot in his society's imagined human order. His culture's myths assign him particular masculine roles, like engaging in politics, rights, like voting, and duties, like military service. Likewise, a woman is not a sapiens with two X chromosomes, a womb, and plenty of estrogen. Rather, she's a female member of an imagined human order. The myths of her society assign her unique feminine roles like raising children, rights like protection against violence, and duties like obedience to her husband. Since myths rather than biology define the roles, rights and duties of men and women, the meaning of manhood and womanhood have varied immensely from one society to another. To make things less confusing, scholars usually distinguish between sex, which is a biological category, and gender, a cultural category. Sex is divided between males and females, and the qualities of this division are objective and have remained constant throughout history. Gender is divided between men and women, and some cultures recognise other categories. So-called masculine and feminine qualities are intersubjective and undergo constant changes. For example, there are far-reaching differences in the behaviour, desires, dress, and even body posture expected from women in classical Athens and women in modern Athens. Sex is child's play, but gender is serious business. To get to be a member of the male sex is the simplest thing in the world. You just need to be born with an X and Y chromosome. To get to be a female is simply and equally easy to achieve. A pair of X chromosomes is going to do it. In contrast, though, becoming a man or a woman is a very complicated and demanding undertaking. Since most masculine and feminine qualities are cultural rather than biological, no society automatically crowns each male a man or every female a woman. Nor are these title laurels that can be rested on once they are required. Males must prove their masculinity constantly throughout their lives from cradle to grave, in an endless series of rites and performances. And a woman's work is never done. She must constantly and continuously convince herself and others that she's feminine enough. Success is not guaranteed. Males in particular live in constant dread of losing their claim to manhood. Throughout history, males have been willing to risk and even sacrifice their lives just so that people will say, he's a real man. So what's good about men? Well, at least since the agricultural revolution, most human societies have been patriarchal societies that valued men more highly than women. No matter how a society defined man and woman, to be a man was always better. Patriarchal societies educate men to think and act in a masculine way and women to think and act in a feminine way, punishing anyone who dares cross those boundaries. Yet they don't equally reward those who conform. Qualities considered masculine are more valued than those considered feminine, and members of a society who personify the feminine ideal get less than those who exemplify the masculine ideal. Fewer resources are invested in the health and education of women. They have fewer economic opportunities, less political power, and less freedom of movement. Gender is a race in which some of the runners compete only for the bronze medal. True, a handful of women have made it to the alpha position, such as Cleopatra of Egypt, Empress Wu Zetian of China in about AD 700, and Elizabeth I of England. Yet they are the exceptions that prove the rule. Throughout Elizabeth's 45-year reign, all members of Parliament were men, all officers in the Royal Navy and Army were men, all judges and lawyers were men, all bishops and archbishops were men, all theologians and priests were men, all doctors and surgeons were men, all students and professors in all universities and colleges were men, all mayors and sheriffs were men, and almost all the writers, architects, poets, philosophers, painters, musicians, and scientists were all men. Patriarchy has been the norm in almost all agricultural and industrial societies. It has tenaciously weathered political upheavals, social revolutions, and economic transformations. Egypt, for example, was conquered numerous times over the centuries. Assyrians, Persians, Macedonians, Romans, Arabs, Mamelukes, Turks, and the British occupied it. And its society always remained patriarchal. Egypt was governed by Pharaonic law, Greek law, Roman law, Muslim law, Ottoman law, and British law. And they all discriminated against people who were not real men. Since patriarchy is so universal, it can't be the product of some vicious circle that was kickstarted by a chance occurrence. It's particularly noteworthy that even before 1492, most societies in both America and Afro-Asia were patriarchal, even though they had been out of contact for thousands of years. If patriarchy in Afro-Asia resulted from some chance occurrence, why were the Aztecs and the Incas patriarchal? It's far more likely that even though the precise definition of man and woman varies between cultures, there's some universal biological reason why almost all cultures valued manhood over womanhood. We don't know what that reason is. There's plenty of theories, but none of them are convincing. How did it happen that in the one species whose success depends above all on cooperation, individuals who are supposedly less cooperative, which are men, control individuals who are supposedly more cooperative, which are women? At present, we have no good answer. Maybe the common assumptions are just wrong. Maybe males of the species Homo sapiens are characterised not by physical strength, aggressiveness and competitiveness, but rather by superior social skills and a greater tendency to cooperate. We just don't know. What we do know, however, is that during the last century, gender roles have undergone a tremendous revolution. More and more societies today not only give men and women equal legal status, political rights and economic opportunities, but also completely rethink their most basic conceptions of gender and sexuality. Though the gender gap is still significant, events have been moving at a breathtaking speed. At the beginning of the 20th century, the idea of giving voting rights to women was generally seen in the USA as outrageous. The prospect of a female cabinet secretary or Supreme Court justice was simply ridiculous, whereas homosexuality was such a taboo subject that it couldn't even be openly discussed. At the beginning of the 21st century, women's voting rights are taken for granted, female cabinet secretaries are hardly a cause for comment, and in 2013, 5 US Supreme Court justices, 3 of them women, decided in favour of legalising same-sex marriages, overruling the objections of 4 male justices. These dramatic changes are precisely what makes the history of gender and equality so bewildering, and as is being demonstrated today so clearly in most parts of the Western world, the patriarchal system has been based on unfounded myths rather than on biological facts. So what accounts for the the universality and stability of this system? No one currently appears to have any concrete answers, but it certainly appears to be cracking at the seams as the groundswell of the movement towards diversity, inclusion and equality takes hold. But it's also worth recognising a paradox, because ever since the French Revolution, people throughout the world have gradually come to see both equality and individual freedom as fundamental values. Yet the two values contradict each other. Equality can be ensured only by curtailing the freedoms of those who are better off. Guaranteeing that every individual will be free to do as he wishes inevitably shortchanges equality. The entire political history of the world since 1789 can be seen as a series of attempts to reconcile this contradiction. Anyone who's read a novel by Charles Dickens knows that the liberal regimes of 19th century Europe gave priority to individual freedom, even if it meant throwing insolvent, poor families in prison and giving orphans less choice but to join schools for pickpockets. And anyone who's read a novel by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, or Solzhenitsyn, I'm never going to get that right, knows how communism's egalitarian ideal produced brutal tyrannies that try to control every aspect of daily life. And contemporary American politics also revolves around this contradiction. Democrats want a more equitable society, even if it means raising taxes to fund programs to help the poor, elderly and infirm. But that infringes on the freedom of individuals to spend their money as they wish. Why should the government force me to buy health insurance if I prefer using the money to put my kids through college? Republicans, on the other hand, want to maximise individual freedom, even if it means that the income gap between rich and poor will grow wider and that many Americans will not be able to afford healthcare. Just as medieval culture didn't manage to square chivalry with Christianity, so the modern world fails to square liberty with equality. But this is no defect. Such contradictions are an inseparable part of every human culture. In fact, they are culture's engines, responsible for the creativity and dynamism of our species. Just as when two clashing musical notes played together force a piece of music forward, so discord in our thoughts, ideas and values compels us to think, re-evaluate and criticise. Consistency is the playground of dull minds. If tensions, conflicts and irresolvable dilemmas are the spice of every culture, a human being who belongs to any particular culture must hold contradictory beliefs and be riven by incompatible values. It's such an essential feature of any culture that it even has a name: cognitive dissonance. Now, I'm not condoning what's happened in the past, because I'm more interested in what we're doing now and in the future. But it's clear that there is immense and entrenched inertia and momentum for baked-in unconscious bias in every one of us. That's part of our evolutionary development, as well as our indoctrinated belief systems. Both our nature and our nurture have conspired against us, and most of us don't even realise it. Especially someone like me, because I fit neatly into the privileged middle-aged white male Caucasian box. So I've never really personally experienced the downside judgment of discrimination. Sure, I had my battles during my childhood when my hair lip, chronic asthma and almost albino pale and freckly complexion, along with our gypsy lifestyle where we were moving states and towns every couple of years, where I was always a year or two younger and a foot shorter than everyone else in the class, meant that I was always isolated and on the outer, as the newbie, short-assed, punk-chested spadeface. But I was still very lucky because these challenges toughened my resilience, and my good mother, God bless her, instilled in me that it's the different who truly make a difference. As a relative outsider and outcast, I learnt to work harder than anyone else in order to achieve. This early treatment and experience also taught me to embrace and have empathy for others who are perceived and mistreated as different, downtrodden, and the underdogs. My first girlfriend in primary school was Aboriginal, and I had a habit of befriending other school newcomers and outsiders. I remember that when I was in high school in Bordertown, which is a very small, tightly held country farming town where everyone was either Catholic, Anglican or Uniting Church, I befriended a newbie Jehovah's Witness who was ostracised, spat on, isolated and mistreated by everyone else. And as I finished my 5-year architecture degree at the tender age of 21 and looked very young for my age, I suffered a reverse form of ageism where I was constantly asked to show my driver's licence when I was in a pub to prove I was an adult, right up until I was older than 30. And when I was running and managing my own architectural practice at 24, and then went on to become part of the national management team of an international architectural firm that led to my senior executive role with a Commonwealth government department, my boyish appearance, along with the fact that everyone who worked for me was generally 10 to 20 years older than me, meant that I was always up against it and met with considerable resistance and distrust, as many thought I was too young to be leading and couldn't possibly know what I was doing. My answer? Respect others' opinions, work harder than everyone else, and demonstrate through my actions and achievements that their bias, judgment and criticism was misplaced. My actions spoke louder than my words. And 20-odd years ago, my wife Sonia and I became respite care foster parents for a legend of a Down syndrome lad, Brandon. And what a joy he's been. Yet despite his loving and fun-filled nature, I'll never forget the judgmental looking down the nose sideways looks we got from some people when we were out in public. He used to make me really angry, but I've got past that now and actually feel sorry for those who don't accept and respect others who are different for who they are. Shame on them, because they're the ones who are missing out. Now, I'm sure you've had similar experiences where prejudice and bias of some description has affected you and how you're treated when you're different in some way from those around you. So I'm confident that we've all been on and both the good and the bad end, as well as the giving and receiving end of discrimination in some way, shape or form. Now, I'm certainly not comparing my experience with the level of unacceptable treatment that a lot of you and others who have and continue to deal with discrimination and inequality on a daily, lifelong basis, because I can't even imagine what that must be like. The fact remains, however, that every one of us are biased in some ways, often without even being aware of it. We've all judged and been judged. And my actual greatest wish for humanity in our ever more global world is that we all learn to break through our neurological bias and entrenched beliefs, to let go of judgment and embrace acceptance. To embrace differences and celebrate those that are different, because, as my good mother used to tell me when I'd regularly come home crying from school after being teased, it's the different who make the biggest difference. So for me, terms like diversity, equality and inclusion have never been a conscious part of my thinking, because I've always celebrated those that stick out from the crowd. And don't get me wrong, I'm no angel and I've certainly been guilty and continue to be guilty of judging or criticising others as a result of my country Anglo-Saxon Christian upbringing. But either Sonia picks me up on it or I catch myself out on it. It's not easy to fight against our ingrained nature and nurture, so it's a constant daily discipline to correct my thoughts and feelings. So what does diversity even mean? The dictionary describes it as variety in the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders and sexual orientations, etc. So given my rather fortunate background when I look back on it, diversity for me has always been about getting the best person available for the job at hand, regardless of gender, sexuality, age, colour or creed. And diversity is one of our know-how property finance businesses' core gold values, where gold breaks down into G for generosity, O for openness, L for leadership and leading the way you can to lead others in their own way. And the D is for diversity, where we embrace and celebrate everyone's differences. And embracing diversity is evident in our know-how team with a mix of ages, races, genders and geographic spread. My wife, Sonia, and I are equal co-founders where our yin and yang of differences creates a synergy of complementary strengths that's far more powerful than either she or me being the solitary leader. And amongst the rest of the team, who have all been selected on what they can do and bring to the team rather than who and what they are and where they've come from. Amongst our cosmopolitan pride, we've got 4 Anglo-Saxons, a German-Hungarian, a Chinese, 2 Filipinos, an Argentinian and an American. And our virtual team is geographically spread across 4 countries from Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines and America, including 4 Australian states. We're borderless and limitless in our situation and our outlook. And our gender split of males and females is 50-50 throughout the depth of our team. Now, it's important to stress that our team diversity is not planned or deliberate. We're not into imposing dangerous artificial quotas that can create reverse prejudice like some areas of government do, where quotas may result in a tree-hugging, disabled, Indigenous gay female getting a free fast-track ticket to the top. Our approach focuses purely on who is the best available person for the role or task at hand. And just as diversification is a key risk management approach to optimise results when you invest in your wealth, whether it be property or shares, embracing diversity in the workplace brings similar significant benefits. In this day and age, everyone knows their workplace should be diverse, but they often have a hard time understanding or believing just how beneficial workplace diversity is to the business. It's not simply just the right thing to do. Just a smattering sample of some of the clear and repeatedly demonstrated benefits of diversity and inclusion include the fact that ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to outperform their peers. And according to a Josh Burson study, highly inclusive organisations generate 2.3 times more cash flow per employee, 1.4 times more revenue, and are 120% more capable of meeting financial targets. Diverse workplaces are also 5.4 times higher in employee retention. And a recent McKinsey consulting report on diversity reveals that companies with more than 30% women executives were more likely to outperform companies with fewer or no female executives. The report reveals that a substantial differential likelihood of outperformance of 48% separates the most from the least gender diverse companies. But one of the real benefits of our know-how business has been the breadth and depth of creativity, problem solving and innovative thinking that comes from a team with diverse backgrounds and experiences. So if you'd like your organisation to improve retention, spark creativity, attract top performers and increase revenue and profitability, then diversity and inclusion are the key. So while most of us already know that we need to be embracing diversity and inclusion, our inherent bias and entrenched beliefs means that it's not without significant resistance nor seismic growing pains. And this will continue to be the eternal struggle, as our beliefs are fluid and constantly changing, so the balance will continue to ebb and flow like the tide, and the tug of war between different genders, skin colours, races, sexuality, ages, beliefs and ways of thinking is actually what makes us uniquely human. And these changing conflicts continue to sharpen the sword of progress in a globally connected world. Now, in her great TED Talk on why gender equality is not just about women, Caroline Strawn also makes some great contributions to the diversity, inclusion and equality debate. She says that this current huge focus on women in the workplace, this pendulum shift towards focusing so much on women, has her a little bit confused. She asks, is it to address years of historic imbalance? Is it to help women navigate around those trying to get in their way? Or is it to help women get out of their own way? Caroline continues that now I would say the last 10 years have truly addressed an imbalance and they've given women more of a voice in the workplace. But now it's time to move on. So what have I seen in the last 10 years that makes me come to this conclusion? I've seen a gender equality bandwagon rising in the workplace. I've seen a rise in female entitlement. I've seen some men who have this unspoken tension. Some men who believe they're becoming the sacrificial lambs of the workplace, who are commenting that I didn't get the job because I'm a man. But Caroline also hears that I didn't get the job because I'm a woman. Deeply ingrained sexist views, some conscious, some unconscious, from both men and women are affecting this. She's sick of companies that focus on gender equality just to get the badge, and worse still, as a badly judged PR exercise whipped out each year on International Women's Day. As Caroline rightly points out, the sheer fact that there are still more male CEOs called David in the UK's top 100 companies than women is a very sad state of affairs. But Caroline observes that she thinks it's time to call out this gender equality bandwagon, and it seems that no one wants to. So let's all give it a try today. All she wants is for men, women, or however you identify yourself, to have equal opportunity in whatever type of work you want to do. Now that's quite an easy task, but somehow it's become very complex. So rather than unpick everything, Caroline thinks we should go back to some basics. And it's three things that she thinks matter most: confidence, childcare, and capability. Starting with confidence, somehow women have owned the label of lacking confidence, and we give men the label of having too much confidence. She doesn't believe that to be the case. Secondly, childcare. Women don't just become mothers, people become parents. So how have we made parental leave a woman's ask that's discriminating against men? And thirdly, capability. She observes that women's networks have popped up everywhere. There's women in finance, women in tech, women in retail, and they focus on capability. So are we feeding a myth that women are less capable? So, confidence, childcare, and capability. Somehow Caroline believes we've made all these three a women's issue, when in actual fact, they're an every person issue. Caroline continues that here's the thing about gender networks, as she has set up a lot of them that are actually very successful. She worries that they're actually gender ghettos, a place where only women go. Now, she admits that women helping women is amazing. She certainly has seen the magic happen, but she admits that it's not reality. It's not what work looks like. Our workplaces are not generally full of just women. It's men and women. So she questions if her women guiding women is actually missing the full story. She questions if our gender networks are a barrier to hide behind, or are they actually a safe space to grow? Perhaps they're a mixture of both. This was put to the test when Caroline had a dinner out with an industry colleague that she respects and admires, where he challenged her on her women's network involvement, and he said, "What about us white middle-aged males?" Now, she immediately laughed out loud for a long time, like you might be right now. And when her laughter subsided, she responded with, "Oh, but you've had it so good for so long." You've probably heard or even used that response before. But as soon as she realised that she'd said it, she stopped herself because she knew she was in a reaction trap. Caroline says that many people are caught in this gender equality bandwagon reaction trap. So instead she stopped herself and she listened, and that night was a massive turning point for her. And she realised that she needed way more male perspective. She immediately went on a mission to interview and listen to hundreds of men to get a more objective and balanced perspective. And 4 key themes came out of this survey of men that are best summarised in the following quotes from them. Why do women need additional support? If I want to learn something new, I just have to get on and do it. Another said, I can't take more than 2 weeks parental leave as my leaders will think I'm not serious about my career. And yes, that's what women go through all the time too. Others said, I have to leave this company because as a man there's a target on my back. There's no way I'm going to get promoted above a woman. And one that really got Caroline was the man that said, I've always looked at women as equals, but now there's all this focus on women. It makes me think I was wrong. And a CEO said to Caroline that he never has issues with workplace confidence, but he really struggles with dad confidence and dad guilt of not being there enough for his kids. Unfortunately, the media would have us believe it's just mums that struggle with confidence and guilt. But clearly this applies to all genders, and I can certainly testify to this myself, because many years ago, I just couldn't be there as much as I'd like to for my son due to my work commitments. So Caroline believes we're missing something by not bringing men on the journey. And Valerie Alexander compliments this when she suggests that if we're going to get anywhere close to equality, let's stop attacking our allies. When someone is willing to admit and discuss that there might be a problem with their own behaviour, we can't penalise them for that. How would any of us feel to be excluded from the equality conversation because of what we all visualise at the start of this episode? And Valerie continues that unfortunately we live in a world right now where careers are being destroyed and businesses are collapsing because some men have behaved incredibly inappropriately towards women in the past. And now in our politically correct era, we're afraid of using some phrases because we live in a world where words and phrases rapidly take on completely new meanings and connotations. As an example, consider a guy who gets a text from his mum that says, "Hi honey, would you like to come over for dinner tonight and then we can Netflix and chill?" For those like me who didn't or don't know, Netflix and chill means to watch Netflix with a romantic prospect with the eventual expectation of sexual activity. Go figure. Now, in our highly sensitive, politically correct world, changing words, meanings and interpretations means that many of us are walking on eggshells and almost too scared to say anything for fear of retribution or receiving an explosive social media post that goes viral and destroys our reputation in the process. Sadly, Valerie points out that a much simpler response to many men's perception of this female threat and to avoid being the subject of an angry viral social media post is just don't work with women. Of course, no one would ever say that out loud, but somewhere in our brain's amygdala, a synapse fires towards flight in the face of an unnamed potential danger, and stress hormones flood our bloodstream. We can't explain it and don't know why, but whatever happens that makes you feel happy and comfortable around people who look and act like you, it's the same thing that makes you come up with a logical, explicable and totally defensible reason not to work with someone that you just don't click with. Valerie also rightly points out that the biggest stumbling block to achieving true equality is our collective unexamined behaviour, which he believes applies equally to all genders. The real danger of unexamined behaviour are the beliefs that we're treating everyone equally when in reality we're not. When we stop and examine our own behaviour, we can catch ourselves having different reactions to and expectations of people simply because they don't look or act like us, or worse, because they do. The human brain is a remarkable achievement in evolution. The prefrontal cortex evolved in itself into existence when we needed more processing capacity, and how amazing is that? But the amygdala that's been there since the earliest records of human existence, when an encounter is unexpected, it floods your system with stress hormones. This instant automatic fight or flight response is what kept our species alive for millions of years. And unfortunately, none of us in 100 lifetimes will ever be able to change that trigger inside our brains. So our only solution is to change what's outside our brains, to consciously turn the unexpected into the expected, so that we don't have unconscious hormonal reactions that keep our society from moving forward. And how do you do that? How do you change the unexpected to the expected? Well, there are three things that Valerie Alexander suggests that you try. Firstly, as you go about your day, visualise situations before they happen. The meeting you're about to walk into, the new doctor you're seeing, the driver that you just pulled over for having a broken tail light, and whatever mental picture you get, change it. Open yourself to different possibilities. The second thing, when we do encounter the unexpected, is to have the courage to stop and prop and examine your own behaviour. Ask yourself, is this how I would handle this interaction if this person looked like me, or if this person didn't look like me? Thirdly, Make a conscious effort to expose yourself and your children and others to that which is currently unexpected and doesn't need to be. There are enormous and long-ranging consequences when we can change the unexpected to the expected. Consider this. We now have 2 entire generations in the world whose first visual image of a United States president was black with Barack Obama, and whose first visual image of a German chancellor was a woman, Angela Merkel. It doesn't matter what kind of hate or ugliness might have been spoken in their homes. Those pictures are now always within the realm of the expected for them. We normalise things by making them expected. That's the first step towards keeping any person from being seen as high-risk investments. And another great step towards realising true diversity, equality and inclusion is to invest in today's special guest, Donny Walford. Donny is an accomplished executive coach, presenter, blogger and passionate Adelaide Crows supporter, so I won't hold that against her. She's also passionate about business, people development, helping women and economic development in Australia. Donny's an experienced non-executive director and CEO with specific skills in strategy, finance and strategic marketing. Donny's dedicated to maximising the performance of individuals and businesses as an executive coach and mentor, and through her companies Behind Closed Doors and Bottom Line. Donny is passionate about business and economic development in Australia and committed to improving the number of women in executive roles and diversity on Australian boards, including diversity of skills, gender, ethnicity, backgrounds, younger people, and more women chairing boards. Donny's enjoyed considerable success working with boards, executives, senior management and business owners across industry, government and the not-for-profit sector. She's led the sales, marketing and banking division of Australia's leading executive recruitment company Morgan & Banks, which is now Hudson Limited, where I personally worked alongside Donny for a couple of years, before she was appointed as General Manager, Marketing and Business Development with the SA Employers Chamber of Commerce and Industry, trading as Business SA. Donny joined the South Australian Government as Executive Director of Invest South Australia, where she was responsible for foreign direct investment from interstate and overseas. She was also the inaugural Chief Executive, Defence SA, which is a division of the Department of Trade and Economic Development. Following this, Donny was then appointed Chief Executive Officer of Viva SA Inc., which is formerly known as Business Vision 2010. This organisation worked collaboratively with government, industry and community to drive economic, social and environmental development in South Australia. Donny was also Chairman of the Australian Dance Theatre and former Director on a number of boards, including the Social Inclusion Board, the Zero Waste Management Board, the Australian Associated Advisors, Repout Foundation, Heart Foundation SA, SA Great, Advisory Board South Australia for the Salvos, and a founding member of the International Women's Forum Membership Committee. Donny won the Asian Pacific Business Council for Women of Distinction Award and was also a national judge for the Telstra Business Women of the Year Awards and national judge for the Business Awards. As you can hear, Donny has unlimited skills and has enjoyed many successes and accolades. So in today's wide-ranging and very informative chat, we answer all of your questions in relation to diversity and inclusion, the traps of unconscious bias. We discuss quotas, targets and merit selection. We dive into boards and how they work. We cover the traps of being a natural workaholic and perfectionist and what to do about it. We discuss the critical need for focus. She expands on the importance of mentors. She unpacks her property investment and share investment journey along with her definition of sustainable success. We talk about the importance of accountability and much, much more. So you're really in for a great treat today. But before we get into today's conversation, let's finish with another imaginary visualisation. Once again, close your eyes if you're not driving or moving and take a deep breath. Now imagine you're sitting in a computer programming class and the professor just walked in. And picture the Facebook post of a friend congratulating a couple who just adopted a baby. And visualise your state voting in a new premier. Do your mental images differ substantially now from what they did at the beginning of this episode? This imagination brain exercise is a great way of tricking ourselves into examining our own behaviour And it's also how we can consciously turn the unexpected into the expected on the never-ending road to balanced diversity, equity and inclusion. And to sum things up, Carolyn Strawn again captures the diversity sentiment when she suggests that instead of drawing up gender war battlefields and allowing men and women to retreat into their gender camps, how about we try something new? She thinks we need to break recurring conversations and break taboos and move forwards together as allies, not enemies. Every time you hear a conversation, a situation or a person gets stuck in the past, call it out, talk about it and move on. She and I see a future where we can have a truly diversified workplace and world. And she thinks there are 3 things that we can do to help us get there. Firstly, imagine a time where everyone owns their own confidence and we stop labelling men and women as having different types of confidence. Secondly, imagine a time where there is absolute equal parental leave in the workplace and men actually take the leave that they're offered. Because women don't just become mothers, people become parents. And lastly, imagine a time where we stop singling out women for specific capability development and we bring men on the journey together. In terms of diversity, equality and inclusion, I truly believe it's time to move on. I'm ready to move on. Are you? If you're not, then I'm sure you will be after this great conversation with Donny Walford. Hi, freedom fighters. Now, never before has the soft underbelly of our society been more exposed than it has post-COVID, where radical uncertainty and dynamic exponential change has revealed our strengths and our weaknesses across diversity, leadership, business, corporate governance, and its flow-on impact on the need to maximise the performance of individuals and organisations across government, industry and the community. Now, this is going to be critical to our future economic, social and environmental development, both as individual states and as a nation moving forward. So to make sense of where we're at and what we need to be doing about it, I'm joined by one of the few decorated corporate warriors who's uniquely positioned to speak with both passion and authority on all of these critical subjects. And I'm talking about Donny Walford. So welcome. Let's get invested, Donny.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Bushy. This is great to be on podcast with you.
Absolutely. We're going to have a lot of fun. We rubbed shoulders together many years ago back in the Morgan and Banks days and always had massive respect for you then. And I think it's a very timely conversation given where we're at, both as a state and as a country. But
definitely.
Donny, to kick it off, for those who don't know you, can I just get you to give us a quick rundown on who you are, what you do, and most importantly, why you do what you do?
So I currently have been running my own business for the last 14 years, Bushy. I have 2 companies. One is Bottom Line, which is for males or mixed gender, and Behind Closed Doors, which is just for females, business owners and executives and emerging leaders. And it's all the companies are all around leadership development, executive coaching, mentoring, placing people onto boards, and I'm talking about really creating a diversity of men and women and age, skill sets, ethnicity, and importantly, diversity of thought. And I have a real passion for it. I always have, even when I was working in other organisations, banking and Morgan and Banks, as you stated, and went into the chamber, went into government. But every job I've had in my career has always been centred around people development. I just love it. And I think it probably came from wanting to grow up. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a teacher. Until I got into my 7th year and I had a really, really poor teacher, and it turned me off teaching. But obviously it's in my blood because it's what I do. I love to coach and mentor others. And so the reason I do it is because I absolutely love it. my vision on setting up Behind Closed Doors 12 years ago was to get more women into executive roles, more women who owned and operated their businesses to build those businesses and export, so that there was a larger pool to choose from for female board directors, and that was my vision. So that's why I do it. I love it.
Yeah, love it. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that you touched on then that we'll dig into later, because we've both got a mutual interest in a lot of those subjects. But before we do that, what I'd love you to do, if you don't mind, is to go back to as far as you would like to go and take us through your life journey so far, focusing on what you've invested your time, your energy and your money on. What have been the highs and the lows? What have you learned from it, and how has that brought you to where you are today?
Oh, wow, okay. So I'd have to probably say when I returned from living in the UK for 2.5 years, I rejoined what was then the State Bank of South Australia. And I had a huge appreciation then for what we had to offer in Australia, because overseas, the UK was tough, and I had no friends, no family, and had to build a new network. So when I came home, I just threw myself into my career. It made me realise that there were still no females, Bushy, when I went back into banking. So I started. When I started my career, there were 3,500 employees and not one female manager. When I returned to banking back in the 80s, there were still no female managers, and I just had this aspiration to be the first female manager, and I got there, but interestingly got appealed against because I had jumped quite a few levels in that particular promotion, and therefore jumped to quite a few of my male colleagues, and they didn't like it. So I had to reapply for the job that I actually got by a national headhunter, and re-won that job again.
Good grief.
So
now, let's jump straight in there, because that I know the Bank SA or its predecessors, really, the Savings Bank, I think it was way back when,
That's what I joined, the Savings Bank.
Yeah, it was absolute dad's army. It was about seniority. It was about how long you've been there, not how good you are.
Well, that's right. It was never based on merit. It was always based on how many years of service you had. And if you had a qualification, then you jumped a year in your seniority. That was all.
Wow. What
but
a bonus.
You know, Bushy, the real scary thing was before I joined, if you were a female and got married, you had to resign. But when I joined, if you got pregnant, you had to resign. So that wasn't that many years ago, and I know a lot of government agencies were the same, that you couldn't be pregnant and still work, or have children. So that's why there were no females in management, because no one lasted that long before they had to resign. Yeah.
Well, tell me what changed there that even gave the opportunity for you to put your hand up. It
was Tim Marcus-Clark.
Yeah, great.
It was. Yeah. He bankrupted the estate. We know that. He led us. He's our leader. But when he came in the bank in 1984 to merge the Savings Bank and the State Bank, his first question was, where are all the women and where are all the young people? So there were no young people in management roles. There were no women. So he demanded the people and culture area to set up a fast tracking program to, one, bring in graduates. It's the first time the bank had ever brought in graduates from outside. And the second was to get people, the talent management, to get talented people in the bank on this fast tracking program to fast track them into managerial roles.
He was he would have been quite pioneering at that stage of the game, actually.
He was. He was. And it was interesting because he brought in a whole lot of talent from interstate and overseas, that we'd never been subjected to. And what that brought was that diversity of thinking, diversity of doing things differently. And we were the fifth largest bank. Like, we were behind the big four. But we had the most innovative technology systems out of any bank. Like, we were really leading in technology and innovation. And then we crashed the bank, and we basically were sold to a bank that had only been around for 10 years. It was a building society prior to that. That was a dance bank.
Yeah.
And within about 18 months, we were sold to Westpac. So, and I left just after we were sold to Advance Bank, because I thought, I could just see that all of the hard work, all that innovation just basically was unplugged. And so all the reasons why I loved banking at that time, which was driving those innovation ideas and strategies and being part of, once the bank had, we'd bankrupted the state basically, it created so many opportunities, Bushy. And there was that, we separated the bank into good bank and bad bank, and they needed real drivers in the business. And I was a pioneer in a lot of different strategies and tactics, and there was that they were just applauding that. But when you look at, when you said where'd you spend your time and your energy, I'm a natural workaholic. I have to discipline myself not to be. And when I was in senior management and trying to get into those senior management ranks, I was working 80 to 120 hours a week, which is, it's pretty incredible when you think about how many hours in a week that are available to work.
Not a lot of spares there.
And and I just, you tend to lose, like friends of mine would say how intense I was, and it's because you don't realise that people used to say to me, you need to get a life, and I thought, well, I've got one, I'm working, but I think it was because I just wanted to prove that women could lead and manage, and particularly in banking, we had 4,500 people when I left. And I think there are only a handful of female managers, even with 4,500 people. So, you couldn't, that old saying of women have to work twice as hard as a male and all of that stuff. I think there's a bit of that. There's a bit of, wanting to prove myself that I could do it. And also not wanting to fail, because I didn't want, if it didn't work out in my career, I didn't want people saying, see, told you a woman couldn't do it. Mm. If you're setting the scene for other women to come through, you've got to succeed. And the only way I knew how to do it back then was by sheer hard work and long hours.
Tell me, did you feel that mantle at the time? Did you feel like, I'm setting the tone here? If I don't do this well, I'm going to leave a trail for the women that follow me. Was that very much on your mind at the time?
Yeah, it was. It was because I had men tell me, senior managers say, if even when I first went into lending, the manager of the branch said to me, I'm a self-confessed chauvinist pig. If you fail at this, I'll send you straight back downstairs, which was the retail area. And that happened all my career. Like, every time someone took a chance on me, they always said, but you can't fail.
Good grief. That's a lot of pressure externally and internally that you would have been wearing that. And I can see how that would lead itself to becoming, in your own words, a natural workaholic. And I'm probably privileged in that I've sort of got to personally see how you work. And you are a born perfectionist.
That's what I had to change, Bushy, when I was in Morgan and Banks. That's when I realised. Do you remember Jeff Quirvin?
Very well. Got a lot of time for Jeff.
So, me too. And I remember him saying that my standards were too high. and that I had to change them. And I said, well, fine, you tell me how to drop my standards, and I'll try it. And because how do you tell someone that? And but it made me realise that when you're striving for perfection, that means everyone else thinks that they have to operate at those same levels. So it wears them out. You wear your team out because they're trying to operate at levels constantly because they think your expectations are so high. And what happens with perfectionism is that you do work around the clock.
Yeah.
So I got into that mental mindset of it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter, and it's about outcome and output, not long hours. So when you get that together, so now when I do a top tips, particularly for women, I say don't strive for perfection, but strive for progress.
Yeah.
So but it wears you out being a perfectionist. So it's not about rough enough is good enough, but it's good enough is good enough.
Yeah, I'd love to delve into this, and we'll go on a slight tangent here on this very subject, because I suffer the same thing, Donny. I've always been a perfectionist, and it probably speaks to my own insecurities, to be honest, but I've always felt that my only way of making sure that I was going to do something was just to work harder than everyone else, and it's still the demon that I constantly. It's a form of addiction. It is a form of addiction, and it's one that I even now still contend with, because I just can't half do something. I'm either 100% or zero. How have you you've talked about good enough's good enough, and that's easy to say but not easy to do if your inclination is to want to do a really good job. Let's delve into that a bit more. How have you overcome that monster yourself?
So you a perfect example is that you can look at a piece of writing or a tender or a proposal or whatever, and every time you look at it, you could make some improvement, but it gets to the point that you will never put it in if you're trying to get it perfect.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I came down to, well, it's good. And we know we can always improve, unless you're going to be an Olympic athlete where you do have to keep on pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing to be elitist. And what I wanted really in everything I did, whether it be sport or my work or what I do with whatever I do in life, is be good. But do I have to be perfect? And I realised also that my perfection compared to your perfection, compared to someone else's perfection, like all those standards are different. So you spend so much time trying to get something perfect, and someone else might look at it and think it's not anyway.
It's all on the eye of the beholder. That's quite right.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I think one of the things was learning to say no. So you're right. If you have a million things on the go, and every one of them has to be your best job, then you are once again going to wear yourself out. So if you cut back on the amount of things that you're doing and do those well. So the best thing that happened to me there, Bushy, was running my own business.
Yeah.
And as you know, the entrepreneurs, loves the next shiny thing.
Yeah.
And then you go on and on and on. And all of a sudden, once again, you're wearing out your team, you're wearing out yourself. And if you focus on too many things, you don't get all of them right. You can't get anything particularly right. So I started teaching other people about focus, and then thought, God, I could listen to myself about focus. And as soon as I focused in on doing a few things really well, rather than a lot of things okay, my business grew, and it was more successful.
Yeah.
But because I love the next shiny thing, and I had to be disciplined not to focus on too many things in my business, that's when I really expanded my board career. And that gave me that diversity of tasks and diversity of thinking and getting to know companies and getting to know industry sectors. And that gave me the stimulation that I used to get when I used to, like the next shiny thing and do a million things at once.
Yeah, well, that's and you touched on a really good subject there. What criteria do you use to be able to say yes or no? What if you're focused on something, and let's put it in a business context. What's running through your head when you say no, this doesn't fit with my current priorities, or yes, it does? Is there a thought process that you go through?
It's probably one of those quick, fast checklists is, can I add value to this, whatever I'm going to take on? Would I receive any value from what I was about to take on? Do I like the people I'm going to be sitting next to or sitting around a table with? Is it in a growth, emerging or a mature industry sector, and is the company so it's got to hit a couple of those, check boxes. It's got to hit a couple of those for me, because that's what. But that first one I said, can I add value? Because if I can't add value to something bushy, I don't see the point in investing my time in it. I need to add value, and that's important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, talking about adding value and sort of circling back to those days at the bank, I can imagine you would have been up against a lot of resistance. There would have been a lot of people, and let's be straight, a lot of guys who would have wanted to trip you up and to see you fail.
Lots of people used to say, be careful of your back. Yeah, everyone's got their knives out. And I used to think, I can't be responsible for someone else not liking the fact that I'm moving through the organisation. They didn't care when no women were in management, but as soon as you start that journey, everyone seems to care, even if they don't know you. But I just thought, I can't look at who's about to stab me in the back. I can only go forward. And I used to just focus on what I could control, not what I couldn't control. And I can't control what anyone else thinks. I can't control. If I'm doing the best that I can do, be the best person that I can be, and my intention was never to hurt anyone, and but you just can't control how someone else thinks about you, or I used to have some guys that were really supportive of me, and I remember one gave me that Latin saying, "Don't let the bastards get you down."
Yep.
And that when men did that, that was great. But yeah, some men were. But, it wasn't just men, Bushy. Some of the worst were females. I mean,
they'd be very threatened by that. It's like, hey, hold on.
Know why.
Danny's doing fantastic things. I can't, so I'm going to make it hard for her. But did you actually cop a bit of that?
I copped a lot of that, and I never really understood it. And I guess that's part of why Behind Closed Doors is so important to me, because it's about women supporting and encouraging other women to succeed, and not bringing them down. They call those women queen bees, who basically pull the ladder up after them because they've worked so hard to get there. You have to work hard, but that's so dumbass to me. It's if you can help other women and support them and encourage them to achieve unbelievable things, and you can when you've got that support.
Yeah.
And that's what I say to everyone, male and female. It's really, really hard to get to the top of wherever you want in your career, particularly if you're a CEO, because it's lonely at the top.
Yeah.
But it's lonelier if you have no support networks. And I know a lot of recruiters and chairs of boards and directors are now asking CEOs in their in interviews about what support networks do they have around them, and they're looking for people who understand that you need coaches and mentors and peer groups and whatever, because it's hard getting there. It's so much harder staying there.
Totally, and you touched on another subject that's of great interest to both of us, and that is coaching and mentoring. During those very challenging days and probably beyond and throughout your career, who have been your role models, your coaches and your mentors?
I had mainly informal mentors, and they were male, because once again, when I was coming through the ranks, Bushy, there weren't that many females. But the one that I have always role modelled on and have always had so much respect for and still do today, and that's Carolyn Hewson.
Yeah, yeah.
She is just superb. She's a superb human being. She's a superb businesswoman and an awesome director. And when you're with Carolyn, you can have like hundreds of people in a room, and yet you feel like you're the only one. She totally focuses on you. She totally has just eye contact just with you. And she makes you feel, the time that she's giving you, she makes you feel so important, and she's just such a great role model.
That's a very rare skill, and you don't see it very often, do you, Donny? I could talk on one hand the number of people who really make me feel like I'm the centre of the universe, and it's wonderful, isn't it? Isn't it? It's an amazing feeling when you actually do connect with someone at that level, and what a great couple the Hewsons are. Both of them, in terms of what the contribution they've made to Australia across the board, has been fantastic, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah, they really are an admirable pair. Okay, well, so let's take us on from the journey there. So at what point, I know you achieved some brilliant things with the innovations and the disruption that you brought to the bank at that time, but there must have been something that broke the camel's back that said, I've had enough of this. Talk to me about that time. What happened? What were you feeling? And what was the next step from there?
Was this when I left corporate world to start my own business? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, the end of your banking career, really. What was it that broke that back?
Oh, the sale of the bank.
Yeah, okay.
The sale of the bank to a 10-year-old bank. We were a 150-year-old bank. We were really cracking it with innovation and technology, and
got it.
and that it was enough anyway, really. But that's when I went into Morgan & Banks. So one of the head of Australian banking, Simon Stone, wanted me to get into recruitment and headhunting, and when I asked why, I said, they're just cowboys. I don't like recruiters. They always put you in a box. Like, I've been in finance for so many years, and they only ever talk to me about finance roles. And I said I'd never return to banking, only on a board.
Yeah.
But they still didn't listen. They put you in a box. So anyway, that was why he wanted me to get into recruitment, to change it up. And Morgan & Banks was the best recruitment firm in South Australia and Australia at that time.
Totally.
And it was fantastic. I loved my time with them, but once again, I burnt myself out. And then I went into the Chamber of Commerce and Industry for a couple of years, and then I was headhunted to go in and head up foreign direct investment with the Office of Economic Development, and that's where I developed the whole defence strategy for South Australia, and pitched to win the air warfare destroyers. So it was after a career in government that I thought, I've just got to start my own business and do the things I've always wanted to do, particularly in that professional development, leadership development space.
Yeah.
And I've never looked back, Bushy. This 14 years now, and I totally love what I do, and I do what I love.
Yeah, and that's a blessing in itself right there. But tell me, because I share your views, the time I spent at Morgan & Banks it was always going to be a stepping stone for me. I'd come back to Adelaide, and I've been away from Adelaide for a long time, so I need to reposition myself in the Adelaide market. And I remember Morgan & Banks Wayman Chapman tapping me on the shoulder and saying, because I applied for a role to run an architectural practice in those days, and went through the process. And when Wayman came to me and said, "Righto, well, we're offering you the job," I said, "No, I don't want the job, but I want to work for you." Because I was so impressed. I was so impressed with the way that whole thing was managed and handled, and just the way the whole business conducted itself. I thought, this is a great place to be, and a great transition for me to be able to network myself back into the Adelaide market. And with what I loved about Morgan and Banks was that as soon as you mentioned Morgan and Banks, everyone would talk to you, because at some point they knew they probably would have to.
Yes.
So, which was absolutely brilliant, and there's still lessons that I've taken away from the time from Andrew and Jeff that are still evident in the way I operate today. What about yourself? Were there any key lessons that you took away from that environment that have shaped what you're now doing with your own business?
I think once a recruiter, once a headhunter, always a headhunter. You're always on the lookout for talent, and I guess that's what I love doing in my business, that people will describe a certain person they're looking for with a certain skill set and background. And my personal brand is all connect and networker. Yeah. And I have a wonderful national network that I can tap into, both male and female. And I just love the fact that I can talk to someone, and even if I don't know them, someone will know someone that will introduce me and whatever. And I don't do it as a business anymore. That's that adding value to other people's businesses.
Yeah.
And particularly when people struggle with diversity, and not just gender diversity, but those young people and different skill sets. Like digital now is a really well sought after skill set. So that people know that I've got good networks, and just like what happens around any board table, I guess, is who do you know with this skill set, this background, that looks and smells like this, and you can help out.
Well, you're an amazing connector, and I think that the industry breeds that. You're really good at recognising talent, but you're also a jigsaw puzzler, in that you can go, right, this is the right piece for this particular situation.
And it's helped me in my own business with that whole mentor coach. That matching process, Bushy, is really important to get, because you're not going to be open and honest with people that you can't build trust and relationships with and you can't connect with. Yeah. So getting that piece right is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. Let's do a parallel for a minute then. And before I do that, if you look back on your working career to date, what's been the most challenging time over that journey, and what did that result in, and what did you learn from that particular experience?
I would have to be back to those banking days where it was just so tough to you have a voice but use your voice. It taught me to think quickly on my feet. Yeah. Which is interesting because, out of 150 senior managers and you're the only female, if you didn't think quick enough on your feet, you wouldn't be heard. Yeah. But what that did around board tables many years later, I got feedback from the chair saying, let the others have a go. Once again, only female on boards, but let the others have a go. Don't be the first person out of the gates to say something. And what that taught me to do was listen to what everyone else had to say, and then summarise what they said, and then in addition add whatever value you could, but do it all succinctly. And that made me a much better board director.
Yeah, brilliant. That's an absolute brilliant tip right there. Now, I'd sort of want to step parallel for a little minute and talk about your relationship with money on your journey so far. And I want you to take us back to the time that you invested your first dollar. What did you invest in, and how did it go?
So my first, when I was growing up, and obviously being a big saver, hence went into banking. It's trying to teach everyone else how to save and invest. But so my first purchase, which I paid cash for, was I bought a car when I was 17.
Yeah, nice.
And so I never bought anything that I couldn't afford to pay cash for, which is really interesting because these days, with money being so cheap, you tell everyone to do the opposite, don't you? Don't use your money, use everybody else's, and yeah, make that money work for you. So it's interesting that, you know, I came through, part of my banking life was when interest rates hit 17, 18%.
Back in the late 80s, yeah, remember that time?
Yeah, remember that? So,
yep.
Yeah, so you didn't necessarily want to borrow anyone's money then, but these days, with it being so cheap, I mean, it makes sense that you use the cheap money.
Absolutely. Now,
so
go on.
Yeah, but it was a car.
Yeah, no, nice work. Well, let's continue on that path a little bit because, as you and I both know, a lot of hardworking Australians purely invest in their work, their career, or their business, and their focus is on income. But those that achieve true financial freedom also invest in growth assets that effectively replace their work income with passive income over time. What growth assets have you and do you invest in?
So I've always done a mix. I like to spread the risk. So it was always property and shares, and that's in addition to super. So I mean, super to me is a safe investment unless the government keeps on changing regulations on you. But it's basically, you know, it's good tax effective, and it's good. It's a good safe savings, but you can't just rely on your super. You have to make your money work for you. So there was one stage a few years ago where my husband and I, we had 6 properties, and but through life changes, we basically capitalised on all of those, and so really all I really invest outside of that property now is in shares.
Yeah, well, it's a good diversified mix there, and that works pretty well. Just on that then, can you tell us what's been your best investment so far and your worst investment so far in that regard?
Right, my worst investment was we purchased a quite a good sized block of land in Meningie, and the reason why Meningie, we have a friend down there right on the lake, and they were just about to build a marina.
I remember it.
And we wanted to capitalise on that, and there were a couple of blocks that they only a few years earlier had gone for $26,000, but when we were buying, they went up to $155,000, and we were bidding on a couple of different blocks over a few months, and we finally got one of them, and then within 3 months there was no water.
Ouch.
And we kept that land for too long, trying to hope that the market would go up. But if you remember that the water didn't come back to Goa or Meningie or those sorts of places for quite some years, so we took a loss on that, and that hurt. My best would have been buying zero shares when basically they just sort of IPO'd, and that, look at them now, they're just doing amazing.
Yeah.
But what I've always done is not bought sold. I tend to buy and hold, and then those growth stocks I tend to not sell the whole, sell half and then buy something else. But interesting that sometimes I just buy, hold and forget, like a Commonwealth Bank share, for example.
Yep.
But something like a growth stock like Xero was, once it got to a fairly high level, I sold half of what I had.
Yeah, smart, very smart. Love what you're doing there. Let's slightly pivot then to one of my favourite subjects, and that's sustainable success, and I emphasise the word sustainable in that. How would you define sustainable success, Donny?
So, something that you keep on building upon, and it's still so it doesn't matter if you are in a crisis time like GFC or COVID. That you basically call it crisis proof. That you have an investment, or you invest in, like I invest in my business as well.
Yeah.
That is, I don't believe in future proofing. How do you know what could be future proof? But that sustains in times like we're going through now, as well as in the good times. So interestingly, I actually set my business up in 2006. So that was basically the beginning of GFC, and really thought I had a recession-proof business. And then it was tested again not too many years later with the COVID. Thank God I had already taken my model online prior to COVID. So it was very seamless, but I think it's just continually like that, the continual process improvement, transformation. Make sure that you're continually. I hate that word pivot now because everyone uses it.
I know, and I just did too.
But you've got to keep looking at it and making sure you're relevant. And that's why I like to keep my head in on with my clients that. I sit in on all of the executive Adelaide behind closed doors groups, so I can hear what the women's challenges are. I can keep up with what where we need to keep on improving, and being in a small business, you can change really quickly. BHP and the size of those sorts of businesses can't change as quickly as small business can. So I think South Australia is a wonderful state to live in because we're an entrepreneurial state.
Absolutely.
And we can make changes quickly. We can respond to changes in the marketplace quickly, or respond even before changes happen. Read. I think you have to read up, talk to lots of people, be aware of challenges, because generally Australia lags behind, global. We didn't get GFC for a couple of years after it started hitting in the US and the UK. Yep. COVID was breaking before it broke in Australia. So, if you keep informed about what's happening in your global marketplace, you can make changes to your business and your business model quite quickly, and your investment model. What we talked about earlier with the interest rates being so low and the share market being so high. I mean, work it while you can, but don't stay in when you see it dipping. And I guess that was one of my worst shares story was Babcock and Brown, where they just kept going up and up and up, and I wasn't watching the market close enough as they were starting to come down, and I lost everything, and I just thought, God, I'll never do that again.
Yeah. No, very good tips there. Let's jump to the future then, because we'll come back and dig into some of the key issues that we're tackling with. But I'd love to get your thoughts on what your future dreams and goals are at this point.
Oh gosh, Bushy, they've changed because my husband 3.5 years ago was diagnosed with an incurable cancer. And I have completely changed what really matters to me, because it's once again, it's people, it's family. I spend as much time now as I can with David, and we're in his health journey together. It's always we do everything regarding his health together. Yeah. So I've been raising money for cancer for 8 or 9 years, and did lots of big bike rides every year, raising lots of money for Cancer Council. And then all of a sudden you realise, wow, it's close to home. And so my dream is I want to grow old with this guy.
Yeah.
He's so important to me. But so what we do now is I set milestone, like little things like going to Appalachian in next month, going to Port Douglas a few times a year, like just every 3 months, try and do something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And so, always, you don't want to keep on rushing through life. And then when you think retirement might be 60, 65, 70, you never know if your partner's going to be there with you. So why would you wait until all those years come and then when you're ready, they're not there. So change your mindset, Bushy.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I lost my folks a few years ago, and that was a very grounding moment for me.
Yes.
That really does emphasise exactly what you said, that, life's for living. You want to plan, but you don't want to put off enjoying it while you can, as
exactly.
we can. And my heartfelt condolences to you and your husband. It's a bastard of a thing to contend with, cancer. It just robs you of body, mind and soul, and it does it very slowly and painfully. So I feel for you both contending through that. That's what took my good mother in the finish, and it was painstaking to see the suffering that she went through. So full marks to you both for embracing life as we see it. But just talking about that legacy piece then, Donny, what legacy do you want to leave?
I'm still so focused on what I set up behind closed doors and bottom line to do, which is, improve people to be the best that they can be. And if I can truly help assist, get more women in those exec roles and staying there, and more women and younger people and real diversity onto boards and staying there. And that's what I do it for. And as I said earlier, I love what I do. I do what I love. And my legacy, if we can get that 30% women now, I think, on boards up to, the 40% mark, then I think I've done what I set out to do.
Yeah, it would be absolutely massive. So let's dive into that whole arena right now, because it's fair to say that we've had a number of major triggers over the years, and none greater than COVID and what the pandemic has done since the beginning of last year. Talk to us about the impacts that you think that's had, and how that then flows into all of those key things we're talking about, its impact on our lifestyles, on community, industry, government, the economy and markets generally. What are the learnings that you're seeing, and what are the changes that you think individuals and organisations need to be making to best embrace the opportunity that's come out of it, rather than resisting the change?
Well, the most obvious change is hybrid working. So we have people who work from home or work remotely, but most from home. And we've got A teams and B teams. We've got people who don't want to work in an office anymore, and we've got people who need to work in an office because they like structure, and they like they might have things at home like domestic violence or whatever that they can't work at home. So this is the first time we were starting to talk about leaders having to lead through 5 generations in the workforce at one time. Well, now we've got 5 generations and people working in a hybrid model. So leading teams today is much, much trickier than it used to be. I mean, how do you run team meetings when half of your team aren't even there? And when you think about even being promoted, and I've always said to women, you need to network, you need to make relationships and connections, because you need to get on people's radar to let them know you exist. Well, now what happens with males and females working at home is they're no longer in the side of the line of sight of their bosses. So when they're looking at people to promote, they're not there.
Spot on.
Exactly. So people have to start thinking about their future careers. If they want to work from home 24/7, they're not going to be seen, and you so quickly get forgotten. So I think that we have to be mindful of that. Another thing that leaders now have more so than ever is that whole mental health well-being. So if people are working at home, how do you as a leader even keep on the ball with how people are feeling? And we're not equipped. We're not counsellors or psychologists or psychiatrists, but we have to be aware that if it's not them, it could be their children. And I know a lot of parents are worried about their teenage kids, particularly those in secondary schooling and going for year 11 and year 12 exams, and some kids are just not coping. There's a whole lot of things that are happening now that as leaders and even as leaders and parents coping with all of that we've probably never really seen to this extent. So I think we've just got to be offering a lot more support to our leaders and preparing them for how to lead in these times. And Bushy, one thing is they keep on talking about 70 and 80% vaccinated and learn to live with COVID, and I think that's where we're going. But we've got to really look at this pandemic. Well, it won't stop. There will be multiple different pandemics that we will have to cope with going forward.
Yep.
So you can't keep locking down.
Spot on, 100%. Well, let's focus in on the sort of cornerstone of all of that, and that's maximising the performance of individuals and organisations in this sort of constantly changing dynamic. Your read of what are the key things that we need to be focusing on there to optimise all of that?
Are you talking about as leaders, what do we need to do to maximise?
So as a leader in an organisation of any shape, size or form, what different things do they need to be doing in the context of that changing environment to maximise the performance of the individuals and the organisation as a whole?
I think a lot of it is really understanding each of your individual team members. What like always, what turns them on and what turns them off. What gives them the most. What's the environment we're setting up for them so that they can do their best work? So the same with that working from home environment as an example. The setup of most people at home, there are people that are working off dining room tables and things like that. So are they actually set up to do their best work to get the best bang for their buck and we get the best outputs and outcomes? Then in the environment of we no longer have international students and people coming in from overseas for job opportunities, right?
Yeah.
So the biggest impact we could have is to get all of these people, particularly women, who are underemployed, who could work more hours, but they're not.
Yeah.
And younger people who could work more hours and they're not. So how do we turn around from an economic point of view? How can we turn around the that whole economy? Look, right now would be that we give more hours to people who are already in the workforce. And then, but maybe make sure that we're matching the needs of our future with the needs that we have right now. So, as I said earlier to you, digital, you could be anything digital. You know, if you're getting your kids to do anything at school, make sure they're learning how to code, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Because, so anything digital and anything customer is what is the mainstay opportunities for now and in our future. So what can we do to maximise that in our workforce and make sure that we've got the right people doing the right things the right way? So a lot of it is continual. I think we don't invest enough in our professional development. I remember in banking there was a huge investment in training and skills development and professional development. But ever since I left banking many moons ago now, unless I've invested in myself, in my own professional development, no one else has. So I was spoiled in the bank, not realising that no one else. But I think, remember that, I think it was in the 80s or it might have been the early 90s, where the government said we will, that you had to spend at least 1% of revenue on training.
Yeah, I do.
And that, I think we need to bring something like that back, where you spend money on your people to improve their skills and their value to you as an organisation for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, unless it's instituted like that, it just doesn't happen. It becomes a nice to have rather than a must to have, and it falls off the list.
That's right. And I know marketing and travel and all of that are the first to hit when you're trying to cut budgets, but the one budget you should never cut is your professional development and training.
Yeah, 100% agree. Now, I'd like to shift into the area that you've got a real passion for and a lot of knowledge around, and that is the importance of diversity. And it's a subject that I focus on ourselves, because in our business, one of our core values is diversity, and it's made an enormous contribution to. We're just a much better organisation as a consequence of embracing that. And I'm not just talking about men versus women. I'm talking about gender and ethnicity and background and age and the whole shooting match. It just really does. It creates both a depth of awareness, but also synergies that just aren't there, and innovations that come out of that just aren't capable when you've got a sort of a mono culture, if you like. But unfortunately, diversity is still a bit of in our PC world, people tolerate the discussion, but the actions speak far louder than their words, which is what I'm really saying is lack of action. What's your thoughts on how we can continue to embrace diversity in our businesses, in our boardrooms? Talk to me about that, because it's something that you've worked tirelessly on over the years.
Yeah, and I think what you said resonates as well. It's not just about women versus men. It is diversity of thought even. And when you have diversity around your room, young people, old people, people who don't look the same as us, that the difference in your decision-making really changes, because your conversation changes, your discussions change. The one thing that really changed it up for boards, and I guess in some ways you could call it a quasi-quota, but it's when men in Sydney, I think it was, went to the AICD and got their endorsement for the 30% club. So what it meant, and this was when there are 19-20% of women on Australian boards.
Yeah.
And so it was a focus by men, and I think that's where the conversation changes, that men were wanting more women sitting around their board tables and exec tables. So they were the ones who committed to having on all of their boards at least 30% were women. So that really changed it up, because it was men. And they're over 30% now. So obviously, I'd love to see it at 40%. So I think the other thing that's really key with diversity, Bushy, is inclusion. It just can't be diversity. And you'll hear a lot of Aboriginal people say, you've got these big RAP plans where you want at least 2 or 3% of your workforce to be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. but you don't include us. So you recruit us, but you don't include us. So a lot of it is, and when I was on the ABC board, this is what I thought that they did really, really well by having culture training. So we understood what because we all got different needs. Women have different needs to men and so on. But the Aborigine employees were telling us that the way that they were excluded in conversation, for example, or the way that we expected them to fall in with the way white people do business, those sorts of things. So it's all about inclusion.
Yeah.
So it's, as I said, even if it's about women being on boards, the way, what has someone's been saying over the last few years? It's, women are trying to fit into a system designed by men for men.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing that we were asking people of different ethnicity to fit into a system designed by Anglos.
Yes. Well, I can tell you firsthand on that score. Back in the days I was an architect, Donny, I did a lot of work with Aboriginal communities up in the Northern Territory and in Western Australia. And I did a lot of community planning work with a lot of the community elders too at that time. And time again, they kept saying to me, we get sick and tired of these white fellas coming out to try and turn us into white fellas. We're not, and we never will be. We don't live in 3-bedroom homes. That's not how we like to live. We are nomadic. We like to move. Until they come up with a housing solution that reflects our lifestyle, nothing's ever going to work, and it's always going to be a waste of time and money. So
exactly.
And why did it fail? No inclusion. It was imposed. There was no inclusion. It was imposed on them, trying to mould them into who we are and our way of thinking.
Exactly. It's that definition of insanity, isn't it? Let's do the same thing the same way to get the same result. So must be so frustrating. But so if we were talking about diversity, we need the inclusion piece. That otherwise we're just going to keep on talking about diversity.
Yeah, spot on. Totally agree. Something that I know that, I know you've spoken about this before, and you mentioned earlier the sort of quasi-quota, which I'd probably prefer to call a target than a quota. And I'd say that, Donny, because I spent some time in the Commonwealth government back in the days when we were reshaping the Commonwealth, just before I joined Morgan and Banks, actually. And I've got to say I was pretty frustrated by the I'm going to call it positive discrimination quota system that was imposed at that point in time, because they actually set percentage quotas on how many women needed to be part of it. And it sort of rubs me a little bit the wrong way in the context of, positions should be on merit, not just on gender. What's your feeling around that?
Oh, I constantly talk about not having quotas because it should. I talk more around equal opportunity. We all need, like, if you're putting a shortlist together, as an employer, you should say, I want 50%, at least 50% of my shortlist to be women, or 50% of my shortlist to be ethnicity, or young people, or whatever it is, or a mix. So that's one. And if you can't deliver on that, tell me now, and I'll appoint someone else. The other thing is, if you appoint from a quota, say, for example, I was put on because they said I need to have a woman, so just give me any woman. If I failed, it would be, see, told you, so women can't make it, just like what happened in my career. Or the other people sitting around the table would go, well, the only reason you got on here is because there was a quota for it. And it may not be the case, but the fact that it was a quota appointment, and that's why I've always been against it. But I know a lot of men and women have changed their mind because it's so slow in the growth of getting more women onto boards, for example. So I just think that when we I don't mind targets and, set goals and targets then, and strive to achieve or exceed. No problem with that. But as soon as you make it a quota that you have to have women on boards or in your executive team and therefore, as I said, you might be the right person for the job, but others around the table are thinking you only got there because it had to. So that's why I don't agree with it.
It's a very good point.
Merit-based, I've heard a lot of women say, so, women want to be placed onto boards or into executive roles because of merit, but have men in the past been placed on because of merit? I don't buy into that argument because I don't care what happened before. I only care what happens now and in the future.
Both of those are very good points because let's face it, there's a lot of boys' clubs around the place, and they're a dying breed, but they still exist. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Well, I don't think we should focus on that. There's always going to be the people who are biased, that they don't want women or young people or people with different skill sets on their board. I get it. So let's change them. Let's focus on the people who have an unconscious bias and try and help them see that what those biases are doing to stop having true diversity and inclusion on their boards and in their management and exec teams.
Yeah, well, and let's just delve into that because that's a really important word that you've just used, unconscious bias, because there's a lot of us that aren't even aware that the bias is there, and that bias can start from the very early age. It's almost a subliminal thing.
And that's right. It might be something that their parents used to say, or sons have their fathers are their role models, and they just pick up on these discussions all through their growing up years, and they don't realise they're being biased when they're in the workforce. So it is a matter of just pulling them aside and saying, hey, look, you might have not realised when you were saying this is how it makes other people feel. And some men are genuinely, oh my God. And we have different biases. When even as women, someone will mention a pilot or a doctor or something, and a lot of people just go straight into thinking, oh, they're talking about a male. So non-traditional roles for women, even down to our footy teams now, when the AFLW came in, I remember a woman saying, why do we call it AFLW for women, but we don't call it AFLM for men? And I thought, so, it's just...
So true.
But it's just like it's AFL, isn't it?
It is.
It's just AFL. Either the women are playing or the men are playing. But it's interesting, there's all of these tiny little things that you don't even realise until someone else picks it up.
We aren't aware of the lenses that we look through life. That's exactly right.
Exactly.
Tell me, sort of transitioning that into the boardroom experience, because it's something that you have tremendous expertise in, both as a board member, but also on the work that you're doing to help place people into boards. And unfortunately, there still seems to be quite a perception that a lot of boardrooms are closed clubs of suits in the shadows that pull the strings. I'd love for you to demystify boards for us and how they actually can and do contribute to our collective success. Can you talk us through your thoughts around that?
Well, if you think of a board's main responsibility is to hire and fire its CEO, set the direction, the strategic direction for the business, and to measure and monitor the business performance. The best directors are the ones who do not interfere with what management is doing, but support them in being able to execute on all of what I just said. So they can play a pivotal role in the success of a business if they get that right.
Yeah.
And that is the old, they need to set the culture. They need to make sure that the culture they're setting, the strategic direction they're setting is on track. So it's a very much an accountability model, I guess, in the way you can look at boards. So I and the relationship between the CEO, managing director, and the board is critical. And therefore the role of that CEO in working with their executive team to implement and execute those strategies and that includes that whole risk frameworks and whatever. They're critical. The CEO is a critical role, and the board's a critical role. So I think where it falls down, though, is when, as I said, that the board play a management role and not an executive, a board director's role.
Yeah.
And I think also when there are agendas with people around the room that are a personal agenda rather than for the good of the business and the good of the company. And sometimes, it's tough when you're directing and you can see that things aren't going to plan. That the worst thing you can do, though, is start interfering with how it should be done.
Yeah.
So that real governance model is really, really important. But once again, if people are wanting to have a board career or expand their board career, the biggest thing that they can get right is their networking and relationship building, because it's if you once again are not on their radar, that when they are looking for their future directors, if they don't know you exist or even what value you can add to that industry, that company, and therefore that board, then you can't expect the people on the board and the chair to do your thinking for you.
Yeah, spot on. One of the things that a lot of people don't recognise either is the liability that goes along with being a board member. It's not a joyride. It's not something where you go along for the privileges and the dinners and the backslapping.
Well, no, there's hardly any of that anymore, and there's a whole lot of fiduciary responsibility, and that's why doing the AICD course is absolutely critical. And the first couple of sessions really push home what your responsibilities and duties are as a director. And even if you're on a not-for-profit charity board, you're still liable for that business, for that organisation. So you have to go in with your eyes wide open, and the best course you can do is the AICD course.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt. You mentioned two key words during our discussion that I think are really relevant to any successful board, and that is trust and accountability. How, and not an easy one to answer, but how do you make sure that you are creating a trusting environment on a board and also making sure that the accountability is there? What's your experience in that?
So as far as trust, and I think this is part of your due diligence process, Bushy, that you make sure that you are joining the board for all the right reasons. But one part is understand who the board is, and particularly the chair, because the chair's the key to make sure your board is functioning, a high functioning board.
Yeah.
So it's like anything, isn't it? Even when you're applying for a role in an organisation, the big thing is you're checking that the culture is the right fit for you, and the culture of the board includes its directors. So that's number one to get right. If it doesn't feel right at interview or when you're doing your due diligence, it isn't right. So don't get on there because you've got to say yes to every invite to join a board.
Yeah.
So that's critical. But you build a lot of trust around the table. So when you join your debt, you don't always know who's sitting around that board table. So it's really building those relationships quite quickly so that you can build that trust in that relationship, like in any relationship. And the more you have in common and the more your beliefs on how the business should be conducted, the better. And then as far as the accountability, you're on that board not to be a wallflower. You're on that board to make sure that you're asking the right questions. You've got your head around the papers, your board papers, and you do. Sometimes you ask the tough questions, but that's to make sure that you've got that trust in your executive and management team as well as around the board table. But sometimes it's asking those questions outside of the board table. Sometimes it's not right to give feedback in a boardroom, but by just having a coffee or a meeting outside of the boardroom to once again talk about where I think the behaviour around the board table didn't really work on this occasion. And one of the things that we instituted in one of our board around our boards was that at the end of every session, after the executive and the CE walk out, that you look at your own performance. How do you think we went today? How do you think the decision-making went today? Was there anything you think we could have improved on? That's always good to do quickly because it's fresh in your mind how your board meeting has gone. So I think that's often good to do. But sensitive things I wouldn't necessarily bring up in the boardroom, but I'd talk to my chair or a particular director after the board meeting.
Yeah. A smarter way to handle that rather than a group format where group think and everything else can start to influence reactions to it. Now, I love that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's certainly an area, and let's face it, the boards of our major organisations are really the potential engines of growth and direction. And it's certainly an area that is going to be really important in the challenging times that we're going to continue to have moving forward. So love your thoughts on that. But I now want to sort of jump into the good old Fast Five, Donny, what I call the ambush series, the quick questions that the listeners always want to glean your wisdom on. And the first of those is, what's your favourite quote and why?
What other people think of you is none of your business. And that was by a woman called Regina Brett. And why is probably what I described to you in earlier in the podcast is you can't control what other people think of you, and so many people reflect and worry about what other people think, and yet you can't control it, so only control what you can.
Love it. In the literary field, what's the top book that you'd recommend listeners have a read of and why?
It's a biggie. It's called Shantaram by Gregory David Roberts. Have you read it?
No, I haven't.
It's about an ex-armed robber and reformed heroin addict who escaped from an Australian prison and went to India. Lived in Mumbai slum, and he launched this free health clinic, and it's almost like a thriller type book, but you get so into the Indian way of culture. But then he joined the mafia, and then he worked in Bollywood, so it's got all the flavour.
Love it, Shantaram.
Of a really good book. Shantaram. It's really, really excellent.
I'm going to add that to the Kindle list. I'm a rabid reader. I've always got.
I read mine on a Kindle as well.
Beautiful. So, what was the author's name, David?
Gregory David Roberts.
Gregory David Roberts. Beautiful. Well, that's certainly going on the hit list. Thanks for that, Donny. That's awesome. Now, this next question is a little bit left field, but most Aussies still believe they pay way too much tax. So what's the top legal thing that you've done to minimise the tax that you pay, Donny?
Just sock as much into super as I can. Still the best tax-effective savings tool.
Yeah, exactly right. Spot on. Simple as that, really. Now, in terms of investment advice, What's the worst and the best investment advice that you've ever received to date?
The worst was when I was 19, I had a life insurance policy that was going to mature at 45, which sounded like 100 years away at 19. And when I was in my late 30s, I was advised by a financial planner to cash it in and put money into a different investment vehicle. And when I was 45, not only did I not get that huge payout, my investment was a third of what it was when I invested in my late 30s. So
Ouch.
That was the worst. Yeah, that hurt. And the best advice was from a woman who I trust, who said about leveraging all your investments, your property, your shares, and having a real mix of investments. Just don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, great advice. Brilliant advice. And the final one, what's a personal habit that you believe has contributed most to your success today?
Discipline.
Yeah.
I'm really, really disciplined in everything I do. And a lot of people say, even my closest friends say that I'm the most disciplined person they've ever met. And I think that's why I can get a lot done and fit a lot in. But it also means discipline in when it's time to relax, I relax.
Yeah. So different discipline at both ends of the equation, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that something that comes naturally to you? Have you always been disciplined, or is that something?
Yes, I have. I've trained myself to be better, but I've always been disciplined, and I always thought growing up that in my 20s and 30s, if I had my time again, I'd probably go into the Defence Forces or something, because I love discipline.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm exactly the same. It gives me structure. I can see where I'm at and what I need to be doing, and it's just a matter of just do it. Just don't think about it. Just do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Spot on. Love that. Here's another sort of big question to bring everything to a natural conclusion here. If there was one life-changing message that you wanted to get out to the 7.7 billion people that are alive in the world today, what would it be and why?
What was it? Can you say that again, Bushy?
If there was one life-changing message that you wanted to get out to every single one of the 7.7 billion people that are alive in the world today, what would that message be and why?
Oh, wow. Life-changing. Don't sweat the small stuff. Yeah. You can spend so much time on the little things. A bit like that, the rock, the rocks, the sand and the water that go into a jar.
Yeah.
And you spend so much time on the sand and the water, but the big things like the rocks, which are the important things in life, spend more time on that. So sweating the smalls, you can fight about everything little, but then when you really, when it really means something that's really important, that's the time that you should focus. So yeah, don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah, brilliant. And the last question, just to close off, if you're looking back on your life so far and our conversation today, what do you believe you've really invested in?
People.
Yeah.
People. I love people. I could never be someone who could sit behind a desk all day on a computer or, I need to be with people. I invest in people. I'm energized by people. I've got a lot of energy of my own, but people energize me, and I love seeing them grow and develop.
Yeah, there's no greater satisfaction, I think, coming back to that sort of early desire you had to be a teacher, and you've sort of become a teacher in a quasi exercise and actually had far more impact as a result of the work that you've done, and that's all around loving to invest in people and see them grow and flourish. So love all that. As we close off, what's next new and exciting for Donny Walford?
I'm going to get my business into a saleable state so that I can concentrate on. I'll still stay exec coaching and mentoring and leadership development, and board career, but I want to spend more time on the personal life.
Yeah.
And so in 5 years' time, I'd love to sell the business.
Yeah, I love it. And spend time with that great husband of yours. For those that have really picked up their ears and love what you've shared with us today, how can the listeners connect with you and get more invested with you, Donny?
I have a website, behindcloseddoors.com or dwbottomline.com. So either way, and all our contact details are on those two websites. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm Donny and David on Twitter, or BCD Women, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn these days is the best professional network. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I'd love to have people connect with me and get in touch that way.
Love it. Really enjoy your insights today, Donny. It's been great to catch up. As I say,
thanks, Bushy.
Yeah, tremendous respect for you and the time that we worked together at Morgan & Banks, and have followed your trajectory from afar. So very appreciative of your generosity in catching up with me today and sharing all of the wisdom that you've accumulated over your life so far with myself and the audience. So
it's been brilliant, Bushy. Thanks for the opportunity.
Likewise, and we'll stay in touch. Thanks, Donny.
Will do.
Cheers.
Bye.
To get a summary of all this investment gold in the show notes, just email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. That's HELLO@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.bushymartin.com.au/get invested. I look forward to joining you next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. So thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you'll live forever and live as if you'll die